Hi there, and welcome back to A Life Worth Living. We've been exploring the secret of Paul's contentment in Christ and how Jesus makes our lives worth living. In our last session, we looked at how Jesus gives us new responsibilities.
Paul's letter to the Philippians is a letter he wrote to his friends. In chapter 2, verse 12, he writes, "My dear friends." Not only is Paul writing to his friends, he's also speaking about friendship in this passage. Like Jesus, Paul had a small group of very close friends around him. In this session, we'll look at what new friendship meant to Paul and how we can learn from his friendships today.
As we start, let's pause for a moment in our groups to read the Bible passage we'll be looking at in today's session. One of you can pray, and then someone else can read Philippians chapter 2, verses 19 to 30.
A woman who'd recently become a Christian wrote to me, "It is such a joy to have Jesus as a friend. As his friends, become your friends too, to share one's joys, laughter and problems, which then distill hope, faith and happiness." The COVID-19 pandemic revealed how friendship is more important than ever. The social isolation felt by so many through long and difficult lockdowns showed us how much we need connection with each other. We're not meant to go through life alone. What is life all about? You could say life is all about friendship. It's the reason for which we were created. We were created for relationship.
In Genesis, we read that Adam and Eve walked with God in the cool of the day. They were created for friendship with one another. In that creation narrative, everything that God created is called good, but there was one thing that wasn't good. Genesis 2, verse 18 says, "It is not good for man to be alone." So God created a suitable helper. Of course, marriage was part of God's solution, but human friendship is God's greatest answer to the issue of loneliness.
As we go on in the book of Genesis, we see that things went wrong. It was the sin of Adam and Eve that caused the breakdown of their friendship, not only with God, but also with each other. And you see right there the issue that we all face. Because of the separation caused by our sin, we have this longing for friendship. But at the same time, we have this issue with relationships where we are constantly creating friction with each other and falling out. Someone described it to me as being like two porcupines in winter that want to get close to each other to be warm, but as they get close to each other, they hurt each other and come apart again. That's sometimes what human relationships are like.
On the cross, Jesus destroyed the barrier between us and God and a barrier between people. Ephesians 2, verse 14 says he destroyed the dividing wall of hostility. He made it possible for our friendship with God and one another to be restored. And he demonstrated what friendship is all about in his own life through having a group of friends around him. In John's Gospel, he described the chosen disciples not as servants, but as friends. Within that group, he had a small group of 3 friends he was especially close to, one of whom was his closest friend. He demonstrated that marriage is not the only solution to aloneness. Close friendship is another solution. Today's over-sexualized society often undervalues the God-given value of friendship.
Let's take some time to pause for discussion in our small groups. What does friendship mean to you? What do you think about the idea of having friendship with God?
In this passage, we get a little insight into 2 of Paul's friendships. Here are 3 ordinary Christians who show us a relatable model of an extraordinary relationship, and therefore what we can learn about friendship today. We see 4 ways to develop great friendship.
In the ancient world, there were 2 categories of people, the Jews and the Gentiles, or the non-Jews. Paul's friend, Timothy, was a Gentile who became a Christian through Paul. In 1 Corinthians, Paul calls Timothy his son in the Lord, and they had become very close friends. Paul was older than Timothy, and he described their relationship as being like that of a father and son. They had been through a great deal together. We read in the book of Acts and some of Paul's other letters that Timothy and Paul traveled together. They were even in prison together. They did a whole lot of stuff together, and they became very close friends. Timothy was always loyal to Paul and was totally reliable.
In verse 20 of this passage, Paul pays tribute to his friend Timothy. He says, "I have no one else like him who takes a genuine interest in your welfare." As Paul looks around, he sees the problem of self-interest, saying in verse 21, everyone looks out for his own interests. A popular retail brand commissioned a survey of over 1,500 of its millennial customers to find out what was important to them. The first question asked was this: what matters most to you in your life? 95% of those asked responded, me.
Paul chose as his friends 2 men who were quite different from those around him. He loved Timothy, who took a genuine interest in others. He also loved Epaphroditus and says his death would have caused him great sorrow. He is kind in his praise of him and shows a genuine concern for his safety. Epaphroditus himself was a loyal friend both to Paul and to the Philippians. True character comes across in big and little things, and often it is the little things that are most telling. Epaphroditus revealed his true character in his attitude towards his fellow Philippians. Having become seriously ill, almost to the point of dying, he is troubled not about being ill and close to death, but that they might have been upset by it. Verse 26 says he was distressed because you heard he was ill. He was like those whom, when ill, are not so much worried by the illness as to the fact that they might be a burden to their family or friends.
Here we see the first mark of Christian friendship. It arises out of a genuine interest in other people. It's difficult to make friends when you're only interested in yourself and what you can gain. Friendship comes through a genuine interest in other people. Dale Carnegie, who wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, said, "You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you."
I once went to a seminar on global politics. I remember one of the speakers saying that his mother had taught him as a child that if you want to make friends, you have to learn to play with other people's toys. It was such a profound statement because it applies to everything in life. It does apply to global politics. It also applies to church relationships. It applies to all our friendships. If we want to make friends, we've got to learn to play with other people's toys. We've got to be interested in the things that they're interested in. Genuine love for others should not be confined to those who are already Christians. Friendship is by far the most effective way to pass on the good news of Jesus Christ. We don't make friends in order to evangelize, but friendship and evangelism go hand in hand. We make friends because we're genuinely interested in others. And because we're interested in others, we want to tell them about Jesus.
The second reason for their close friendship was their common concern for the interests of Jesus Christ. It's human nature to only look out for our own interests. When you look at a group photo, who is the first person that you look at? I heard about one man. He was arrested while staring at his own picture outside a police station. It was a wanted poster.
Friendship is formed by looking outward together in the same direction. When friends go to a football match together, they chat whilst looking in the common direction. Friendships are like that. C.S. Lewis says this: "We picture lovers face to face, but friends side by side. Their eyes look ahead."
But of course, Christian friendship has a different dimension because our eyes are not just fixed on football or some other common interests. Our eyes are fixed on Jesus. That brings a totally different level of friendship: trust, security, forgiveness, and openness. Paul, in searching for ways to describe this level of friendship, often uses the word brother. He describes Epaphroditus as a brother in verse 25. In his first letter to the Thessalonians, he describes Timothy as a brother. In my own life, I have a few Christian friends who I think of as brothers. They know everything about me, and I know everything about them. When I need them for anything, they are always there to support, pray, and point me to Jesus.
Jesus accepted everyone, but he chose his friends. If Jesus needed a small group of friends, so do we. We need to be able to talk to those who we trust deeply and to encourage and pray for one another. The pastor and author John Wimber said, "People come to church for many reasons, but they'll stay for only one: friendship." People are not just looking for a friendly church, they're looking for a church where they can make friends. We can create an environment of love where people can find friendships which are enriching, rewarding, and emotionally restoring.
The third mark of Christian friendship is that it arises out of a common vision and goal for our lives. Paul and Timothy served together in the work of the gospel. Timothy ungrudgingly accepted second place so long as he could serve. Paul did not lord it over Timothy. Likewise, verse 25 says Epaphroditus was a fellow worker. So often it is working together for the gospel that brings us close to our Christian friends. Fellowship and mission go hand in hand in the New Testament. It is important to meet with other Christians simply to be together, to talk and to pray. But if that ever becomes an end in itself, it is self-defeating. Unless we are involved together in the work of the gospel, such groups become inward-looking and ineffective.
But as we work together, our friendships flourish and blossom. As different denominations work side by side, unity grows. We can only achieve unity by working together to bring the good news of Jesus to those outside of the church. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw Christians work together to provide meals to the vulnerable and support the isolated. As Christians, we have a shared goal to make a difference in the world around us, and what unites us is infinitely greater than what divides us.
Paul regarded both his assistant Timothy and his congregation, the Philippians, as his friends. That surely is the only real basis for a flourishing church: close friendships among the leaders, between the leaders and the congregation, and among the congregation, as we all serve together in the work of the gospel.
The fourth mark of Christian friendship is give without expecting anything in return. This is so different from our modern culture. In our culture, if you pay for my lunch, that means next time I have to pay for your lunch. We keep account. If I do something for you, then you do something for me. If you don't, you're a bad friend. But this is completely opposite to Christian friendship, which is about honoring people. Epaphroditus had been prepared to risk his life for the sake of the work of Christ.
In verse 25, Paul describes Epaphroditus as a brother, fellow worker, and fellow soldier. The Christian life is not all easy. We are fellow soldiers. The battles we face may not be as severe as those of the early church, or indeed some parts of the world today. For example, the church in the West doesn't face prison, torture, and death, but nevertheless we face very real opposition. Genuine Christian faith is often despised and ridiculed. Christian friendship means supporting one another in the battles of life. Epaphroditus had been prepared to risk his life for the sake of his friend Paul. His name suggests his parents devoted him to the service of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and also the patron of gambling. His name may mean one blessed with gambling luck.
Whether or not that is true, it certainly was true that he had the character of a risk taker. The expression used in verse 30 could be translated as hazarding his life, but is more accurately translated as gambling his life. It may have been that by associating himself with Paul, who was in prison on a capital charge, that Epaphroditus risked the same charge. Or it may be that he risked draining his life by excessive hard work and disregard for his own health. Whichever it was, or whether it was a combination of the two, Epaphroditus showed reckless courage on behalf of Paul. This is the mark of true friendship. Paul himself and Barnabas are described in Acts chapter 15, verse 26, as men who have risked their lives for the name of our Lord Jesus Christ.
A little girl named Liz, who was suffering from a rare and serious disease. Her only chance of recovery appeared to be a blood transfusion from her 5-year-old brother, who had miraculously survived the same disease and had developed the antibodies needed. The doctor explained the situation and asked the little boy if he would be willing to give his blood to his sister. He hesitated for only a moment before taking a deep breath and saying, "Yes, I'll do it if it will save her." As the transfusion progressed, he lay in bed next to his sister and smiled, as they all did, seeing the colour returning to her cheeks. Then his face grew pale and his smile faded. He looked up at the doctor and asked with a trembling voice, "Will I start to die right away?" The little boy had misunderstood the doctor. He thought he was going to have to give his sister all of his blood in order to save her. This boy loved his sister so much that he was willing to die instead of her, as her substitute. This possibly fictional story is simply an illustration of what loving substitution means. When talking about his friendship with his disciples, Jesus said this, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends."
All friendship involves taking risks. Jesus made himself vulnerable to his friends. He was totally open with them. In John 15, verse 15, he said, "I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you." Yet in the end, he was betrayed by one of them, deserted by the others, and disowned as an embarrassment. Friendship will always involve the risk of rejection, hurt, and being let down.
But it is in giving that we receive. It is in risking our own lives for others that we find life and friendship. We are not to seek friends for ourselves, but to be friends to others. We are not to look to our own interests, but to those of Jesus and of others. This is where true joy is to be found. A popular definition of joy is J-O-Y. Jesus, others, yourself, in that order. Epaphroditus had this order right, and that is why Paul expected him to bring joy. Paul tells us to honor people like that. In Paul, Timothy, and Epaphroditus, we see people who were following the example of Jesus Christ, who showed them and us the meaning of true friendship.
Let's take some time to pause for discussion in our groups. As a group, how do you hope to deepen your friendship with one another? How can your group share in the work of the gospel with each other? And then in pairs, take some time to honestly share how you are and what you'd like prayer for. Spend time praying for each other.
Thanks so much for joining us for this session of A Life Worth Living as we explored how Jesus gives us new friendships. In our next session, we'll begin reading through Philippians chapter 3 together and see how Jesus gives us a new confidence.
Why don't you close your session together in prayer now?